What's going on, guys? This is Sam, and after a long time in beta testing, an update that many of you have been waiting for a very long time is finally available. iOS 11.3 is here for iPhones, iPads, and iPod Touches capable of running iOS 11. This update is very comparable to something like iOS 11.2. There are a lot of features to talk about, and the changelog is a lot more lengthy than I initially anticipated it being. I don't want to go through every single change because that would take an incredibly long amount of time, but I want to point out the highlights of what's new in iOS 11.3. First up is augmented reality and ARKit 1.5, which adds support for vertical surfaces in iOS 11.3. This is one of the biggest areas where I thought that AR was struggling, so I'm really glad to see that that support has been added for vertical surfaces in this update. If you use a lot of AR apps, I feel like they're only going to get better with ARKit 1.5. I got really excited about AR when it was first announced, but the hype for me in recent months has definitely died down. Following that, you may remember a few months back when the story broke that Apple was slowing down older iPhones with older batteries. In this update in iOS 11.3, we have iPhone battery health features that shows you what your iPhone's maximum battery capacity and peak performance capability is. If it's not at peak performance, you can actually disable the battery throttling by going to Settings, Battery, and then iPhone Battery Health, the tab right here. If you aren't at peak performance, you can disable it in this section. If your phone is at peak performance according to the settings panel, then you can't do anything to change it because your iPhone isn't being impacted by the software that slows your phone down if the battery's old. It's a very complicated story that is still kind of developing. I believe there is a class action lawsuit that is about to be filed for a number of individuals that are suing Apple for doing this. It's going to be fascinating to see how that plays out. In the meantime, Apple is doing their best to remedy the situation for users. They are giving us a more transparent look at our battery and at battery health and the option to disable the throttling if we don't want it. Next up, for iPhone X users, there are 4 new Animoji in iOS 11.3. We have lion, bear, dragon, and skull. I'm a big fan of all 4 of these. I think they're really cool. There are already rumors that more Animoji are coming in iOS 12, and I look forward to seeing other emojis that Apple adds to the lineup in the future. Next up, in iOS 11.3, Apple tries to highlight and protect user privacy more than they have in the past. They say, quote, "When an Apple feature asks to use your personal information, an icon now appears along with a link to detailed information explaining how your data will be used and protected," end quote. Apple has long been a proponent of user privacy, so this feature makes it more transparent when Apple's using your data and how it's going to be used, and more importantly, how that data is going to be protected. Next up is an interesting feature called Business Chat, also currently in beta like the new battery health features. It is US exclusive right now, but it allows you to engage with companies through the built-in Messages app on your iPhone, iPad, or iPod Touch. It's an interesting idea because rather than having to go to a third-party service or site to communicate with a company, I assume a company could send you an invite to basically an iMessage conversation, and you could communicate with them directly through the Messages app rather than having to go to Safari or anywhere else. Following Business Chat is something called Health Records, which is another US exclusive and beta feature that allows you to, quote, "access health records and view lab results, immunizations, and more in a consolidated timeline in the Health app," end quote. Because Health Records is a beta feature still, there aren't that many clinics or hospitals on the launch docket. I'm sure that more will be added in the future, but right now the list is rather finite. For news, top stories should now always appear first in the For You tab. In the App Store, the Updates tab now shows version number and size. In Safari, this one's really important. Warnings are now displayed in the Smart Search field when you're entering sensitive data like passwords on non-encrypted pages. Really glad to see that added. For fixes listed under Keyboard, iOS 11.3, quote, "addresses an issue where autocorrect could incorrectly capitalize some words," end quote. For accessibility, the App Store now gets bold and large text support, and Smart Invert doesn't invert images anymore online like in Safari or in emails in the Mail app. Also included as part of iOS 11.3 is a relatively long list of other changes and improvements, and because there's a lot, I want to pick out 3 that I thought were the most important. I'm going to be reading these directly from the changelog. iOS 11.3 introduces support for the AML standard, which provides more accurate location data to emergency responders when SOS is triggered. Apple notes that this is only in supported countries. Podcast now plays episodes with a single tap. And finally, iOS 11.3 11.3 fixes an issue that could prevent incoming calls from waking the display, which could be a big deal if you're expecting a phone call. Inside of Apple Music under Browse, there is a new tab here called Music Videos. It is focused, of course, exclusively around music videos. Apple had previewed that this was coming to iOS 11.3 at some point, but it was not actually put into iOS 11.3 until earlier today. And one last change I want to highlight is for the iPad. It says that whenever your iPad is connected to power for a long period of time, like if you're using it in a store as a kiosk or a point of sale system, it's going to somehow maintain battery health. I assume Apple has tweaked the power management or how the battery charges or when it's charging and when it's not. We don't know exactly what this feature is or how it works, but I thought it was interesting for anybody that uses iPads in a retail or sales environment. As you can see, iOS 11.3 is a very large update, but important to note here is that Messages in iCloud and AirPlay 2, which were part of iOS 11.3 during the beta cycle, have been cut from the final release. If this is what is included in the final version of iOS 11.3 at launch, Messages in iCloud and AirPlay 2 are absolutely not coming to iOS 11.3 and have been delayed even further than they already were before. Apple has really been struggling to get those two features in particular built into iOS, and it's weird because both of them were in iOS 11 at one point. They were in the iOS 11 original beta cycle or in iOS 11.3, and Apple consciously made the decision to remove them, apparently because they weren't ready to ship for everyone just yet. So I hope we see them soon because the wait time is getting a little bit out of control. Now, as always, on top of regular features and changes, there are a ton of security fixes as well, and I think it's always important to highlight these because there are some pretty big issues that tend to get fixed between releases. Number one, I just want to highlight a few here. We have clock. It says a person with physical access to an iOS device may be able to see the email address used for iTunes. These are always fascinating to read through because I had no idea that someone could get my email address used for iTunes by taking advantage of some part of the clock app that wasn't functioning as expected. Luckily, that has been fixed in iOS 11.3. This one is pretty big. For Find My iPhone, a person with physical access to the device may be able to disable Find My iPhone without entering an iCloud password. This one is a much bigger deal than just seeing someone's email address. I didn't know that that issue existed in previous versions of iOS 11, but this is a really good incentive for everyone to update to iOS 11.3. Obviously, you wouldn't want someone with physical access to your iPhone to be able to disable Find My iPhone without your permission, or more importantly, without your iCloud password. Those are the two security changes that stuck out to me the most, but there are a lot of other WebKit fixes and a number of others where applications were gaining elevated privileges when they really shouldn't have been. All of these are good incentives for everyone to update to iOS 11.3 because on top of getting the new features and changes that we talked about before, you're also getting a really secure version of iOS. There's a lot of new features and changes inside of iOS 11, from real new features to actual security fixes happening in the background. I also want to talk about battery life and performance because in iOS 11, above every firmware in recent history, those have been really hot topics and big points of contention for a lot of people. Full disclosure, I've been running iOS 11.3 on the newest devices. I tested it for a few months in beta on my iPhone 10 and then just updated my iPhone 8 to iOS 11.3 today. I have not used iOS 11.3 on an older device, but on my iPhone 10 specifically, the battery life has been really good. No big improvements over iOS 11.2. It also, I don't think, has gotten any worse than iOS 11.2. For me, it feels about the same, but performance is a different story because unlike battery life not really changing that much between releases or updates, the performance has gotten really, really good on my iPhone 10. Now, this is the newest device, so you would expect performance to be good already, but even after updating my iPhone 8, the frame rate drops that I would see are non-existent, and opening applications is the smoothest I've ever seen it on iOS 11. It's really crazy. I don't know what Apple did between releases, but they modified something in the core of iOS to make everything feel more fluid and smooth, and you notice it on a daily basis. I definitely think it's safe to say that iOS 11 with iOS 11.3 is at a point where everyone should update to this firmware. If you've been holding out for that update that finally had all the bugs worked out and no kinks and great performance and great battery life, iOS 11.3 is unquestionably that update. You have amazing new features, amazing security fixes, and the best performance and battery life that I've gotten on iOS 11 to date, although the battery life has been roughly the same as iOS 11.2. So go ahead and get updating. Now, unlike last year with iOS 10 and iOS 9 before it, the 0.3 release for this version of iOS is not actually going to be the final version that we see ahead of iOS 12's public release, probably sometime in September or October. We're going to see an iOS 11.4 beta come coming very soon, so make sure you stay tuned for all the info on that. As always, I love hearing your thoughts, so let me know what you think about iOS 11.3 by leaving a comment down below. There's a lot of good stuff in this update. The new Animoji characters are amazing. I also think business chat is interesting, and ARKit 1.5 should really improve the way AR works. This is hands down the best version of iOS 11 that I've used, and I would recommend that everyone update immediately. If you enjoyed watching this video, it does help me out if you take just 1 second to drop a like, and of course hit subscribe for more videos like this in the future. If you want to help support the channel, you can head over to shop.iupdateos.com, use the code iOS for 10% off your order. That would be incredible. For now, I've been Sam. I hope all of you are doing great, and I will talk to you in my next video.